Will January the 22nd, 2015 be remembered as a make or break day for Europe and its single currency? To ward off job-crushing deflation, the European Central Bank embarking on an unprecedented 18-month bond-buying experiment, 60 billion euros a month through September of next year. Mario Draghi predicts that bond buying will push up prices in a eurozone, where with oil prices plummeting, inflation now stands at minus 2%. Will it be enough? Was this the big bazooka moment David Cameron was calling for back in 2011? Some want more and argue it would send a strong signal to the markets if the whole of the eurozone shares the risk and keeps all those bonds at the ECB vault in Frankfurt. But in a nod to those who wanted less, most notably the Germans and the Dutch, 80% of the assets will instead sit in the various central banks of member states. Is minimum risk sharing the right way to go more broadly after the financial crisis, after the sovereign debt crisis, and ahead of Sunday's Greek elections that could once again test Europe's markets? Is the single currency back on firm footing? Well, joining us today in the France 24 debate for what is a make-or-break moment for the euro. We'll be crossing to the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland in a moment. We welcome to our studios John Pallison, former advisor to French Socialist Minister of the Economy, Arnaud Montebourg. Joining us from Brussels, he's been an advisor who's written up recommendations for the French and German governments, of Guntram Wolf, Deputy Director of Bruegel, the think tank based in Brussels. Thank you for joining us as well. We're also pleased to welcome from Berlin Markus Kerber, Professor of Political Economy at Technische Universität in the German capital, the France 24 debate, where you can join the conversation on Facebook and Twitter, our hashtag F24debate. Guntram Wolf, I'm going to start with you. And before I ask you whether it's a big bazooka moment, just for our viewers, people get lost when there's so many zeros. We're talking about, what is it, a little more than €1 trillion over 18 months. I mean, I know when my evening newspaper, Le Monde, raises its price to €2.20, what that means. What does 60 billion euros a month mean?
Well, I'm just trying to count the number of zeros, and I think 1 trillion is in fact 12 zeros, if I'm not wrong. So in fact, yes, that's a large number. Now you have to put that, of course, in proportion to the size of the EU and the eurozone economy, which is itself 10 trillion. So we are talking here of a program that is roughly 10% of eurozone GDP.
And was this the right medicine? Did they go far enough in Frankfurt?
Well, look, I think it was clear that the ECB had to do something. The inflation numbers have been really devastating. Inflation expectations have gone down very substantially. So clearly there was a need to do something. Now, I don't think the ECB can fix it all. We need very substantial reforms at the national level to fix the very important divergences that we have in the eurozone. Yet that cannot be a reason for the European Central Bank as a joint institution not to act. So I think the ECB was right to act, and ultimately it had to do this program. Now I think it will have a material impact, especially by lowering the exchange rate, but also by pushing investors into more risky investments, and therefore essentially kickstarting growth. So it should indeed help.
Should indeed help. We're pleased now to welcome Markus Kerber from Berlin. Do you agree?
Well, as you can imagine, I fundamentally disagree. I think if ECB had to prove something today, it was its capacity to act and its will to show that it has still some instruments available in order to underline its creditworthiness. The program as such is the most significant transfer of risks from southern European banks to the portfolio of ECB or even national central banks, and it will try quite certainly, it will achieve quite certainly a discontent within the German population, which goes beyond everything which we have seen. We have seen today not the end of the euro, but the beginning of the end of the euro, because there's quite clearly a total split, a political split within the Governing Council. The balance of payment surplus countries do not agree to the line proposed and advocated by Mr. Draghi and Monsieur Curé.
But hang on a second, Marcus.
If you play around too much time with the majority shareholders of an international institutions, sooner or later, those who back that institution, the German taxpayer, will get fed up with that.
But Marcus Kerber, this is fact. The inflation rate in the eurozone is minus 0.2%. Surely the Germans agree with doing something big to stop that.
Well, this is the official reasoning of Mr. Draghi, that his action and the policy advocates only response to the monetary target of having inflation around something like 2%. We have, as a matter of fact, radical disinflation, but we are far away from any deflation, at least in the northern part of Europe. And Mr. Jens Weidmann very prudently commented the almost totalitarian pretensions of Mr. Draghi and his followers, the people who worship him like Mr. Guntram Wolff, saying that there is deflation. The Eurozone is not an entity with a coherent, homogene political and economic status. Maybe there is need for dramatic monetary action in Italy or in France, but then this should be done in these countries and not in Germany. Again, the policy which is conducted will provoke not only a political split, but it's going to be the first step, historically, on the way of monetary secession. Because what ECB calls the singleness of monetary policy can no longer be applied to a Eurozone which is totally heterogeneous and which is even more divergent,
let me bring in
politically
John
speaking,
Pallison on
after
this.
that decision.
John, is this the beginning of the end of the euro, as Marcus Kerber was just saying?
Well, there's been concern for a few years already, a fear of monetary secession. And political dissent inside the Eurozone is not something new. What we're looking for from a political point of view is unity, a compromise, a common path for everyone to be able to keep the Eurozone as a common good. The question now, after QE has been debated for a few years now. There's been quantitative easing, has been discussed for many years inside the board of the European Central Bank. Today has been a turning point. It's to say that I would say the German point of view has been put in a minority in the board, and a big decision has been taken. But then quantitative easing is not a magical tool. The main question now is to ask, where is the money going to go? And the most interesting comments which were made about quantitative easing, one by Axel Weber, the former head of the Bundesbank, was to say, are the channels going to work? It's to say the channels which will bring that money into the economy, because what Europe needs as a whole is more investment and more job creation. Put it in one word, more growth. And that is the main question now. And there is concern, maybe, about whether that money will be fueled into the economy or not.
That's an essential question. We're going to pick up on it with the rest of our panel. First, though, let's listen to what Mario Draghi had to say. He spelled out the ambition of the measures announced this Thursday. Again, the idea is to ward off deflation.
The readings of reality differ. And in some cases, the inflation developments are considered to be temporary or heavily affected by temporary factors like the fall in oil prices and so on. So it's different readings of reality which suggest a different urgency in acting.
A different urgency in acting. That was sort of the conversation among the board members of the ECB. Guntram Wolff, first of all, again, is the threat of long-term deflation real? Are these low oil prices for real? And again, to answer John Pallison's question, now that we're in this uncharted territory with bond buying, Will the money go to the real economy or just to the banks?
Well, let me start by saying that I strongly object being accused of worshipping Mr. Draghi. I think that's not appropriate terminology in a debate, in an academic debate. I think we have to be very clear here on what we are discussing. We are discussing monetary policy of an institution in a very complicated setup. Now, this monetary authority has a clear mandate, which is bring inflation close but below 2%, and Ottmar Issing has specified that range as 1.7 to 1.9%. Now, inflation expectations on a 10-year horizon are well below this range. Inflation expectations on a 2-year horizon are really very small, and the current inflation is actually negative. So I think there is a very clear objective numbers out there that inflation is well off the mark of the mandate that the ECB has been given to by the treaties and by the founders of the euro. Now, there has to be, of course, a discussion how much risk is acceptable at the board of the ECB. How much risk can the ECB take on board? There has been a very controversial discussion, and the ECB has taken a decision. And actually, most of the risk, as you know, remains with the national central banks. And this will, of course, make the whole measure less effective. But it has been the compromise to reach actually that agreement.
On that point, would you have liked to have seen more of those bonds kept at the vault in Frankfurt?
I'm sorry?
Would you have liked to have seen? Right now, it's just 20% that's going to be kept at the ECB level. Would you have liked to have seen more?
Well, look, I mean, as I said, I think that's a question of the compromise that has been reached. What I'm saying is, if you want to have single monetary policy and you want to have an institution that is a European institution fulfilling a European mandate, there shouldn't have been any split up in risk sharing. Now, we are not there because we are an incomplete monetary union. That's quite clear. So this is the compromise we have reached. Now, in terms of the effect...
Could I perhaps comment on that? Because our friend from Brussels, who thinks himself an academic and is not, tries to convince those of the spectators who listen to us that there is really a lack of liquidity in the market. The liquidity in the market exists. And corporations, for instance, in Germany, they don't have any problem to find credits. What is wrong, in particular in the countries of the periphery? The supply side. And the supply side has a problem of competitiveness due to governments who don't want to reform, create a framework of reform for the supply side to make their corporations more competitive. I don't see any reason why the program of significant quantitative easing will improve through more liquidity the conditions of financing for corporations. There is a great risk and a high probability that liquidity will be treated as in the past by investment banks to do financial operations which will never reach the real economy. This is the great discrepancy of financial capitalism of our times, and it has not been solved by ECB. And Mr. Draghi, who has to play today the master of the first and foremost European institution, and apparently adored by Mr. Wolf, a German national, at least formally, has shown his incapacity throughout the years.
Marcus Kerber, please keep it civil.
His total domination by considerations of the market. Mr. Draghi is a slave of the market, and Mr. Wolf, thinking himself as an academic, is a mercenary of that thought installed in a French-financed think tank in Brussels, who pays lip service to French policy.
Marcus Kerber, let me put it back to Guntram Wolf at this point. And by the way, there are a lot of Germans who agree with Guntram Wolf. Many economists, including we could think most notably of one that pens his column every week in the Financial Times. Guntram, go ahead.
No, I mean, I just want to say, I'm very happy to discuss whether or not a QE program is effective or not. I mean, this is a proper discussion that we need to have, and I totally agree that there can be different views on the effectiveness of such a program. I mean, that's a normal academic debate. What I don't accept is if instead of giving me arguments on why it is effective or not effective, I'm being told to be a Southern economist or whatever. I think this is totally unacceptable. And it shows that actually those academics using those terms are in a very defensive mode, because the objective facts are just such that this discussion about QE was an absolutely necessary discussion, and there has been a decision that was taken on this. So to my mind, we should really cool down a bit and have a serious discussion about what works and what doesn't work. Now, then I totally
think we are quite ready to have this discussion.
Please let Guntram will
discussion
finish,
at
please.
any time.
Marcus Kerber, please let Guntram will finish.
I'm totally agreeing with Mr. Kerber that Southern economic countries need very substantial and significant structural reforms. I've said that very clearly. And so I don't think there's any difference in our point of view on that. I would always very much want to emphasize that this is very necessary.
All right. I want to bring in somebody else into this conversation, and that is France 24's Marcus Carlson, who is in Davos. Marcus, ahead of Draghi's announcement, The Economist anticipating that Germany would probably hold 25% of sovereign bonds, France 20%, then Italy and Spain. The question being, of course, this question of risk sharing, and that 80% of that risk is going to stay with the national central banks. How do people in Davos feel about that?
Well, I've been speaking to people who say that, well, of course, yes, central banks will, national central banks will back up some of their own countries' bonds. But that 20% level, though, that the ECB, the European Central Bank, will hold on to, still, to a certain extent, actually represents debt mutualization through the back door. That is to say that they think that this is the first step towards the eurozone actually mutualizing their debts, and perhaps a first step to one day further down the line start issuing euro bonds. So basically that the eurozone as a whole would go to the markets to sell bonds or to borrow money. And the people that I've been speaking to, they say once again that this could actually be the first step towards debt mutualization, which of course is very controversial. And you do have the argument here whether or not the eurozone should mutualize its debts, and whether or not this is the first step towards that.
All right, we're going to pick up on these points and more. You're watching the France 24 debate.